Welcome to Madame Raven's. This way to the library. She's been expecting you.
I'm a magician, and I'm pretty sure the kid on stage actually sawed a lady in half. By Magpie Quill. A paranormal circus wasn't really my kind of thing, but I didn't have any performances that evening, and an anonymous benefactor had sent me a front row ticket. The sparkling black and purple circus tent was packed with people. I admit that I can be a bit skittish sometimes, and the macabre costumes of the undead clowns that would roam the aisles startled me an embarrassing number of times. But the show was a spectacle well worth the scares. The acts were at once chilling and captivating. I found myself holding my breath as the vampiric knife thrower stabbed silver blades dangerously close to her prey, and gasped with the rest of the audience when the ghoulish acrobats clung precariously to each other in their aerial act. Among the extravagantly dangerous performances, though, the showstopper was none other than the circus magician. Small and lean, and dressed in a purple satin suit, the magician didn't look any older than 17 or 18. It wasn't uncommon for young prodigies to enter the performance scene early, but something about him was different. He exuded a kind of confidence that most wouldn't learn to have until well into their career, and wore a slightly crooked smile that made him at once charming and dangerous. As for his tricks, they were nothing short of breathtaking. With a wave of his hand, he turned the flowing purple drapes around the aerial silk dancer into fluttering rose petals, and effortlessly caught the dancer in his arms. He called a volunteer to the stage, whispered something in his ear, and made him dance like a puppet on a string. At one point, he simply walked on stage and snapped his finger, instantly engulfing himself in deep violet flames that rose high into the air before slowly sputtering out as he took a small bow, completely unscathed. I rarely found much of a challenge in puzzling out the secrets of other magicians' routines, since my own familiarity with magic usually made it easy to reason out how others would craft their own tricks. The silk turning into petals was a work of clever step-up and practiced timing backstage. The volunteer who got hypnotized was most likely planted there, and while a full body burn was a bold move, these circus performers were probably used to risking their lives daily. I only began to suspect something was strange when the young magician began to perform a classic stage trick. A slender lady accompanied him on stage and lowered herself into a long wooden crate. Conventionally, the crate would be placed on a special designed table, but the table on stage was plain. The crate was also commonly wide enough to fold the body into, but this one was a tight fit. The feet sticking out of one side of the crate wouldn't usually move, but these bobbed as the lady adjusted herself. Mildly impressed, I was beginning to think of what clever trick the young magician had devised when the giant carpenter saw bit deep into the crate, and the lady began to scream. I gripped the edges of my seat and told myself it was just an act as the magician hacked into the crate. The screams grew louder and more frantic, and the crate rattled as the lady twisted in what appeared to be pain, her feet twitching spastically. Thick, red blood began to pool underneath the crate. The magician didn't so much as blink. His blade, and now his hand, was stained, and blood dripped from the table as he relentlessly drew the saw back and forth, back and forth. The audience was silent, and the lady just kept screaming until there was an audible crunch, and she went completely still. There was a lot of fake blood. I wondered if they had concealed a jug of it somewhere. They must have gotten assistance from some big-shot Hollywood artist to get the black bits of chunks in there. The magician put down his saw and turned the severed halves of the crate towards us to see. The audience gasped and murmured at the very realistic-looking torso halves. I peered into the crate itself. Other than the grotesque severed body, it seemed to be empty and plain. The magician swiveled the crate halves back together and smiled. His eyes glittered strangely as he took in the suspense. Then he placed his hands on the crate, closed his eyes, and simply breathed for several long moments. The lady's eyes snapped open. The audience cheered wildly as the magician opened the crate, helped her to her feet, tidied her now blood-soaked dress, and led her off stage. As the lights dimmed and the stagehands swooped in to clean up the props, I could have sworn I caught the metallic scent of blood. Of all the people who could come up to me, I was intercepted by a demonic clown on my way out. He smiled wide with slit lips and jagged teeth, gesturing for me to follow. "I don't really need any more pictures," I said. He kept gesturing. I let out a small sigh and followed him through the crowd to one of the side exits. We stepped out into the night, and he began to lead me around the back of the circus tent. "Where are we going?" I asked, beginning to grow uneasy. The clown just smiled back at me. I followed as far behind him as I could without seeming rude, which really wasn't very far at all. Before I knew it, we were removed from the crowds at the very back of the circus yard, littered with swampy puddles from the afternoon's rain. Square black tents, about the size of a typical New York bedrooms, occupied the grounds. The clown turned to me and pointed at one. "You want me to go inside?" He nodded. I swallowed. The clown stepped back in a comical, exaggerated manner, as if to pantomime to me he intended no harm. Somewhat encouraged by this, I stepped up to the tent and gingerly brushed the drapes aside. Sitting in the tent at the table, with two slender wine glasses, surrounded by glittering yellow fairy lights strung along the walls, was the young magician. Upon seeing me, he smiled, got to his feet, and held out his hand. "Mr. Herring," he said, "a pleasure to finally meet you." In retrospect, it was incredibly rude of me not to shake his hand, but hearing him speak for the first time, combined with the fact he knew my name, caught me off guard. I blinked dumbfounded. "You know me?" "Of course. From the Bellagio Escape Act, right?" "Ah!" I felt myself blush a little. "That was a long time ago." "Certainly not long enough to forget. Please come in. I've always wanted to speak to you." Somewhat awkwardly, I took my seat at the table across from the young magician. The clown walked in carrying a tall bottle. "I do hope you like champagne." I raised an eyebrow. "Are you old enough to?" The magician laughed. "I'll take that as a compliment. My apologies. No, it's really fine." As I sipped the rose-colored champagne, I couldn't help but study the young magician's face. Some of his stage makeup was still on, making his angled jawline and high cheekbones stand out. He wore unsettlingly vivid purple contacts that were covered only by the tips of his long, thick lashes. He certainly didn't look old enough for any of this. "Forgive me," he said quickly. noticing my staring. "I don't believe I've introduced myself. My name is Alexander Chase. On stage, they call me the Mirage." Hearing those words rang a bell at the back of my mind. I'd probably heard some of my colleagues talk about him. "The Mirage," I echoed. "That's in the name of the show, isn't it? The Mirage Carnival?" Alexander smiled. "Yes, this is my show." "That's very impressive. Leading an entire circus troupe?" "Thank you very much. I couldn't have done it without you." "Oh, without me?" "You inspired me to begin performing. The Bellagio escape struck a deep chord, and since then I've followed all of your work. I've always wanted to be like you." This was completely unexpected. I could feel myself swell with pride. "I dare say you may have already surpassed me," I said. "The tricks today were very impressive." "You don't know how much those words mean to me, Mr. Herring. Please, just call me Brian." Alexander smiled. "Brian." The way his tongue formed the sound sent a quiet chill down my spine. In his voice, my own name became mysterious and dangerous. I was startled off my train of thought when a dozen heavy footsteps broke through the nighttime air, sprinting towards the tent. "What is that?" Alexander cursed. "They found me." "Who?" "Quiet." More footsteps scrambled to meet the disturbance. There were shouts of alarm and a loud, resounding crack. I looked to Alexander. He narrowed his eyes at the drapes covering the entrance to the tent. The commotion drew closer with every second. A spray of gunfire tore through the grounds. "Run," Alexander said. "Don't let them see you." Before I could process what he said, he grabbed me by the wrist, turned to the back wall of the tent, and swept his other hand through the air. The black fabric wall rippled and peeled open like a flower blooming. "What?" He waved his hand and the fairy lights blinked out, plunging us into the night. As the last of the glow faded, I thought I saw him take something small and shiny from his pocket and toss it on the floor. Then he leaped through the hole in the wall, yanking me through behind him, and began to run. "Alexander!" I said, "Quiet," he snapped in a hushed tone, "and call me Alex." Voices shouted behind us, the heavy thudding of boots in pursuit. Another round of gunfire tore through the air. I almost dropped to my knees and scrambled for cover, but Alex kept me running. We ran out of the circus yard, through a break in the fence and into a muddy dirt roads. My joints cramped up and I almost slipped and fell several times, but my adrenaline kept me going. I risked one look behind us, but saw nothing in the dark. Police sirens wailed in the distance. "Brian," Alexander said. "Huh?" "We're going to jump." I strained to see the ground in front of us. Closing in fast was a puddle spanning the entire width of the road, filled with muddy rainwater. "Wait, Alex!" "Jump!" Something in his voice instantly compelled me to leap into the air, hurtling straight for the puddle. I yelped and held out my free hand, bracing myself for a face-first impact into inch-deep mud. Then we broke the surface and sank deep into the cold, murky water. It was dark. I couldn't see anything. I was somehow submerged from head to toe, tiny bubbles swirling around me, like I'd just dove into a pool. I stretched my legs downward, but couldn't feel the bottom. Alex squeezed my wrist. Buried in the sounds of rushing water, I could hear my crashing heartbeat. I held my breath, and long seconds passed until we heard the sound of boots splashing through shallow puddles directly above us. Then they were gone. Alex swam upward, pulling me along. We broke the surface and pulled ourselves into a strangely smooth and supple floor. As I caught my breath, soft yellow light flooded the small cubicle space. We were back in Alex's tent, surrounded by fairy lights. Alex's purple satin suit was dry, and so were my clothes. There was no trace of water on the floor. There was a click behind us. We turned to see the man in full body armor and a helmet with a reflective visor. He held a pistol pointed at Alex. Embroidered on his jacket was a patch that read NSF. "Come peacefully," he said. Perhaps I was mistaken, but his voice sounded like he was shaking. His pistol wavered, trained between Alex's eyes. Alex chuckled. "You've got me. I really didn't want to put Brian Herring in danger, but you just had to choose today to storm my town." The armored man's fingers trembled on the trigger. He began to reach for the radio at his hip. I swallowed. "Alex, now that you've seen Brian with me, I guess it's gotta be either you or him." "Easy choice." Alex snapped his fingers. Deep violet flame sprang out of thin air and engulfed the man. I gasped and scrambled away as the man's armor caught fire like kindling. Wild gunshots rang out, but the bullets went wide as he twisted and screamed, the flames slowly consuming him. Alex stood still, watching. A thin smile tugged at his lips. His eyes flickered with the flames, barely concealing something deadly behind them. I cowered in the corner, only watching because I couldn't tear my eyes away. There was no heat to the flame, and instead of the stench of burning flesh, the sweet aroma of roses filled the air. The burning lump of a man crumbled to the floor. Slowly the screaming diminished to small choking sounds. And after what felt like an eternity, it was quiet. The flames flickered out. There was nothing left but a smudge of soot on the tent floor. "Alex," I whispered, as the adrenaline sputtered. A million questions filled my head. The young magician let out a small, contented sigh. "Alex," I managed, this time loud enough to be heard. I was trembling. "You killed someone. It was you or him, Brian." "How?" "They saw you with me, which put you in danger. I don't want you to live my life of being pursued. Not that you could survive long." "But—" He turned to me and put a finger to his lips. "No more." "Alex, I really need some answers." He stared me down with his unsettling gaze. I don't know what came over me, but I refused to falter. After a few tense moments, his eyes softened. "One question," he said. I thought hard, but the million questions overlapped and echoed in an unbearably confusing chorus. In the end, I could really only ask one question. "You're not human, are you?" Alex smiled. He held out his hand and pulled me to my feet. I looked down at him now, waiting. "No," he said simply. I nodded. "It's time for you to go," he said. "I would love to spend more time with you, really getting to talk, but not today." "Will I see you again?" "One question." I pursed my lips. "When you get home, no telling anyone and no calling the police. Got it?" I nodded again. "It was a true honor meeting you, Brian. Something I'd looked forward to for years." Alex stood on the tips of his toes and leaned in close to my ear. "Now, be on your way." I don't remember anything after that. When I came to, I was lying in bed in my house. I had a pounding headache, and I wasn't sure what day or time it was. It felt like I had been asleep for a long time. A quick look around the house revealed that the power cord on my line phone was cut and the antenna on my internet router broken off. On my kitchen table was a sticky note with something written on it. Albeit shaky, I could recognize my own handwriting. 1. No telling anyone. 2. No calling the police. See you again soon. So quoth this raven. Oh, I so loved this story. I so would love to go to this circus, wouldn't you, my darlings? I certainly hope that we hear more about Alex in future. I hope that our dear author, who was kind enough to let me read this, Magpie Quill, oh, you have to love the Corvids, will write a sequel. Next week, I will be posting a day early for Ermin Case's birthday. He has requested a Lovecraft or Poe story. I think it will be Lovecraft. That will be on Monday next week. And hopefully on Thursday, I will have a fun video for you with some old EVPs I have. And we'll see if you can all hear the same thing in them. We'll play a little game. Hopefully on Thursday. I'm still getting that together. It's been a crazy week. Thank you so much for listening, and I've really nattered on at the end of this video. My apologies. I so appreciate you all listening. Please comment. I love hearing from you. And a special thanks to my Patreon supporters, Charlotte Emerson, Ermin Case, Darren and Jennifer, and Laura. If you like this, please hit the little button to let me know. If you didn't, hit the little button to let me know. Leave a comment. I'm always glad to talk with you, my darlings. I'm open to suggestions and criticisms, critiques. If you have not subscribed, please do so and ring the little bell so you know when to come up and see me. And I will talk to you next time, my darlings. Farewell.